Layla lived a life painted in soft hues. Her days moved with a quiet rhythm. She resided in a small apartment, filled with more books than furniture. Mornings began with the scent of old paper and brewing tea. Her shyness was a gentle veil, not a barrier of coldness. She found comfort in the familiar. The world outside often felt too loud, too fast. But within her own space and within the walls of the book nook, she found her peace. She preferred the company of fictional characters. They understood the landscapes of the heart in ways real people often did not. Her solitude was a well-worn coat, comfortable and known. The bookstore was her truest sanctuary. The book nook stood on a quiet side street. Its bell above the door chimed a welcome that always soothed her. She loved the scent of aging pages, a perfume of stories untold and emotions captured. The towering shelves were like old friends, each spine a promise of another world. She knew every corner, every dusty volume. It was more than a job, it was a calling. Here, surrounded by the whispers of authors past and present, Layla felt she belonged. She moved among the aisles like a quiet spirit, her presence barely disturbing the stillness. Her love for Rain was profound, almost a sacred thing. It mirrored her own quiet, contemplative nature. The rhythmic patter against the window pane was a lullaby. It washed the world clean, making colors seem brighter, deeper. On rainy afternoons, the bookstore felt even cozier, a haven from the downpour. She often found herself staring out, lost in thought, a book of poetry resting in her lap. Rain inspired her. It spoke a language she understood. It was the perfect accompaniment to a poignant verse, a melancholic melody. The gray skies never felt gloomy to her. They felt like an embrace. Simple pleasures were the anchors of Layla's existence. A perfectly brewed cup of Earl Grey tea, steam coiling into the air. The discovery of a forgotten line in a beloved poem. The warmth of a sunbeam falling across an open page. These small moments held immense joy for her. She did not crave grand adventures or loud declarations. Her happiness was found in the quiet interludes, the gentle unfolding of an ordinary day. Most of the time, her solitude was a cherished companion. Only sometimes, in the deepest quiet of the night, did a whisper of loneliness brush against her heart, a fleeting, quickly dismissed shadow. One Tuesday afternoon, the sky wept with a ferocity that was unusual. Rain lashed against the windows of the book nook. The wind howled a mournful song. Inside, the lights cast a warm, inviting glow. Layla was alone, as she often was during such downpours. She was carefully arranging a display of new poetry collections. The bell above the door suddenly chimed, a sharp, clear sound cutting through the storm's symphony. It made her startle slightly. She looked up, her heart giving an unexpected little flutter. Very few braved such weather for books. A man stood framed in the doorway, shaking rain from his dark coat. Adam. He was tall, with an air of easy confidence that seemed out of place in her quiet world. His clothes spoke of a life far removed from hers, tailored, expensive. Yet his eyes, when they met hers, held a hint of something lost, something seeking. He offered a polite, almost hesitant smile. He seemed to be searching for more than just shelter from the relentless storm. He looked around the small shop, his gaze lingering on the overflowing shelves, a flicker of curiosity, or perhaps relief in his expression. "Quite a storm out there," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle. It was smooth like aged whiskey. Layla merely nodded, a blush creeping up her neck. Words often deserted her in the presence of strangers, especially ones who carried such an aura. "I was hoping to find something to read," he continued, "something to help pass the time until this eases up." He gestured vaguely towards the window where rain still streamed down. She found her voice, a soft murmur. "What sort of thing do you enjoy?" she asked, her gaze dropping to the counter. He confessed he hadn't picked up a book for pleasure in years. He mentioned something about business reports and legal documents. Layla recommended a collection of classic poems, one she held dear. His eyes lit up with a spark of interest. He took the book from her, his fingers brushing hers for a fleeting second. The contact sent a tiny shiver through her. He found a comfortable armchair by the window, the storm raging outside, and began to read. For hours, he sat there, lost in the words. A silent understanding seemed to pass between them, an unspoken acknowledgement of a shared moment of peace found amid the tempest. Adam became a familiar presence in the book nook. At first, he only came on rainy days, as if the storm was his excuse. Then his visits grew more frequent. Even when the sun blazed brightly in the sky, he would find his way to her quiet corner of the world. He often said the bookstore was the most peaceful place he knew. He would browse for a while, then settle into his favorite armchair with a book. Sometimes he read, sometimes he just seemed to think. Layla found herself anticipating the sound of the bell, her heart quickening each time he entered. Their conversation started slowly, like a hesitant spring bloom. They spoke of books, naturally. He was surprised by her knowledge, by the passion in her quiet voice when she discussed a favorite author. Gradually, they ventured beyond literary discussions. He spoke of dreams he once had, dreams that had been set aside. She listened, offering a quiet empathy. Layla, in turn, found herself sharing small pieces of her own life, her love for poetry, her quiet observations of the world. She had never been good at opening up, but with Adam, it felt different. It felt safe. He began to share more about his life outside the bookstore's comforting walls. He talked about the immense pressure of his family's corporation, the expectations, the endless meetings, the feeling of being on a path chosen for him, not by him. He never complained, not really. He spoke with a kind of weary acceptance, but in Layla's presence, he seemed to shed some of that weight. He confessed that the bookstore was his escape, a place where he could simply be. He said she never made him feel like he had to be anyone but himself. Layla saw beyond the expensive suits and the confident facade. She saw the kindness in his eyes, the genuine warmth in his smile. There was a gentleness to him, a vulnerability that he rarely showed to the world, she suspected. She started to look forward to his visits with an intensity that surprised her. It was more than just a customer she was serving. He was becoming a friend, a very dear friend. The small bookstore, her sanctuary, now held a new kind of magic, a shared magic. The quiet moments they spent together were weaving an invisible thread between them. Laughter, a sound rarely heard in such abundance in the book nook, began to punctuate their days. Adam possessed an easy, charming humor. He could make her laugh with a witty observation or a self-deprecating comment about his attempts to understand modern poetry. Layla's laughter was soft at first, like the rustle of pages, but it grew more confident, more frequent. It was a sweet, melodious sound that seemed to surprise even herself. It felt good. It felt like sunshine after a long, gray winter. The bookstore felt lighter, brighter when he was there. He was observant. He quickly learned of her fondness for certain poets, her love for first editions with their unique scent and feel. Small gifts began to appear. A rare, slim volume of verse he'd found in an antiquarian shop. A single perfect rose pressed between the pages of a book he returned. A bar of her favorite dark chocolate for inspiration, he'd say with a wink. These gestures were never grand, always thoughtful, always personal. They spoke of an attention to detail, a quiet consideration that touched Layla deeply. Each small token was a treasure she held close. A profound, almost breathtaking joy began to bloom in Layla's heart. It was a fragile, delicate thing, this newfound happiness. She knew it. She had spent so long in the quiet shadows of her own life that this brightness felt almost too intense. She cherished every shared glance across the bookshelves, every lingering word at the end of a conversation, every moment his presence filled the store. These were precious jewels of time, strung together on a thread of quiet hope. She found herself smiling more, humming softly as she worked, her world subtly transformed. Yet, beneath the surface of this unexpected joy, a persistent shadow lingered. Adam was from a different world, a world of glittering parties, of immense wealth, of powerful families and dynastic expectations. She was Layla, the shy employee of a small bookstore. The disparity was a chasm she couldn't ignore, no matter how much she wished she could. She tried to keep her heart guarded, to temper her growing feelings with a dose of reality, but her heart, it seemed, had a will of its own. It yearned for him, even as her mind whispered caution. One bright, sunny afternoon, Adam walked into the bookstore. The bell chimed, but his usual easy smile was absent. There was a nervous energy about him, a tension in his shoulders she hadn't seen before. He wasn't carrying a book to return, nor did he browse the shelves. He walked straight to the counter where Layla was tidying a stack of orders. In his hand he held a small, dark velvet box. It looked expensive. It looked significant. Layla's heart gave a strange, uneasy thump. She sensed a shift in the air, a change in the familiar rhythm of their interactions. He leaned against the counter, trying for a casual air that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Layla," he began, his voice a little strained. "I have some news. Some big news." He paused, then opened the small box. Inside, nestled on satin, was a diamond ring. It glittered under the soft lights of the store. A beautiful, ostentatious thing. "I'm engaged," he said, the words tumbling out. "Her name is Clarissa. We've known each other for years. Our families are very close." He said it as if he were sharing the most wonderful news in the world, expecting her to rejoice with him. For Layla, it felt as though the world had suddenly tilted on its axis. The cheerful sunlight streaming through the window seemed to dim. The vibrant colors of the book covers around her faded to a dull gray. She heard his words, but they seemed to come from a great distance. An icy numbness spread through her, starting in her chest and reaching out to her fingertips. She managed somehow to conjure a small, polite smile. "Congratulations, Adam," she heard herself say. Her voice sounded thin, fragile, like old parchment, but thankfully steady. "That's wonderful news." The shatter inside her was silent, invisible. Adam, relieved by her apparent calm, launched into details. He spoke of Clarissa, her beauty, her family's standing. He talked about the elaborate wedding plans already underway. A grand affair, he said, just as their parents wanted. He didn't seem to notice the way the light had gone out of Layla's eyes, or the way her smile didn't quite reach them. Perhaps he was too caught up in his own narrative, or perhaps he simply couldn't see the quiet devastation his words had wrought. The bookstore, once her sanctuary, suddenly felt like a cage, cold and confining. The joy they had shared felt like a cruel illusion. Section 6, A Silent Battle Within, The Hidden Truth of Illness. The diagnosis had been delivered with a quiet finality some months before. It came softly, unexpectedly, much like the gentle rain Layla so dearly loved. But this rain was not life-giving. It was a relentless, eroding storm. The doctors had spoken in hushed, sympathetic tones, using words like aggressive and limited prognosis, a terminal illness. There was no cure, only management of symptoms, a slowing of the inevitable. Layla had listened, her face pale but composed. She had walked out of the clinic into a world that suddenly seemed both achingly beautiful and unbearably tragic. She chose to tell no one. Her circle of acquaintances was small, her connections tenuous. And Adam? How could she possibly burden Adam with such news? Especially now, with his engagement, his future seemingly mapped out in bright, confident strokes. Her illness was her own battle, a silent, solitary war to be waged in the quiet corners of her life. To reveal it would be to invite pity, to alter the way he saw her, to cast a shadow over his happiness. She couldn't bear that. Her love for him, unspoken as it was, demanded this silence, this protection of his peace. Her pain, therefore, became a twofold burden, a heavy cloak she wore constantly. There was the sharp, fresh agony of Adam's engagement, a heartbreak that echoed with every beat of her own failing heart. And then there was the dull, persistent ache of her illness, a constant reminder of her dwindling time. She carried both with a fragile, almost ethereal grace. She continued her days at the book nook, moving among the shelves, recommending stories, her smile a carefully constructed mask that hid the turmoil within. Few, if any, noticed the subtle changes, the deepening shadows beneath her eyes. The bookstore, her lifelong sanctuary, remained her only solace, yet even its comfort was now tinged with sorrow. The words on the pages, once a reliable escape, now often mirrored her own grief, her own unspoken longings. Her secret became a wall, isolating her further from a world she was already quietly detaching from. She would watch Adam when he visited, a bittersweet ache in her chest, knowing their shared moments were numbered, not just by his impending marriage, but by a far more absolute deadline. Her courage was in her silence, in her determination to face her fate alone. Section 7. The Weight of Unspoken Words, Cherished, Painful Moments. Adam continued to visit the book nook, though less frequently now. His life was increasingly consumed by wedding preparations, by meetings with florists and caterers, by the endless demands of his family and his future bride. When he did come, he would often speak of these things, sharing details with an innocent enthusiasm. Layla listened patiently. She offered gentle nods and quiet smiles. Her smiles were genuine in their affection for him, yet they were layered with a profound, hidden sadness. Each word he spoke about his future was a small pinprick to her heart. Every visit from him became both precious and agonizing. She knew their time together was rapidly drawing to a close. She found herself memorizing the small details of his presence, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he laughed, the thoughtful expression he wore when engrossed in a book, the deep timbre of his voice as he spoke her name. These sensory imprints, these fleeting moments, were all she would have to carry with her. She clung to them, hoarding them like a miser hoarding gold, knowing they would have to sustain her through the lonely days ahead. Her physical strength began to wane more noticeably. The fatigue was a constant companion, a heavy weight that settled deep in her bones. Simple tasks like shelving newly arrived books or carrying a stack of volumes to the counter became monumental efforts. She tried her best to hide her growing pallor, the slight tremor in her hands. She would take longer breaks in the small back room, sipping water, gathering her dwindling energy before returning to the shop floor, her smile carefully back in place. She didn't want him to see. She didn't want him to worry. The urge to tell him everything, her unconfessed love, her devastating illness, was a constant, burning torment. The words would rise in her throat, a desperate plea for understanding, for connection, but they always died there, unspoken. His happiness, his bright future with Clarissa, seemed so tangible, so important. How could she shatter that with her own tragic truth? Her love for him was selfless enough to prefer his joy over her own need for solace. So she kept her silence, a heavy secret that bound her heart in chains of unspoken words. Section 8. Fading Light, Enduring Words, A Letter of Farewell. The rain seemed to fall more constantly now, or perhaps Layla was just more attuned to its melancholic song. Each drop that traced a path down the bookstore window felt like a ticking clock, a soft, persistent reminder of time slipping away. Life, her own precious, quiet life, was ebbing like the tide. The world outside the window seemed to be preparing for her departure, cloaking itself in the gray she had always found so comforting. The scent of wet earth and old books mingled, a poignant perfume of endings and memories. In the quiet hours after the bookstore closed, when the city lights cast long shadows through the windows, Layla began to write. Not the whimsical poetry she sometimes dabbled in, but something far more profound, more urgent, a letter to Adam. Page after page filled with the words she had never dared to speak aloud. She wrote of her quiet love, a love that had blossomed in the shared silence of rainy afternoons. She wrote of the joy his presence had brought into her solitary world. And finally, with a steadying breath, she wrote of her illness, of the fading light within her. It was her final act of love, her only way to truly reach him. She chose his favorite book with care. It was a well-loved, slightly worn copy of classic poems, one he had often picked up and browsed, his fingers tracing the lines of verse. He'd once told her it reminded him of simpler times, of a quietude he craved. With trembling hands, she carefully tucked the folded pages of her letter inside, between the stanzas of a poem about love and loss. It felt right. Her words would rest there, nestled amongst words that had already touched his soul. Perhaps one day he would find them. Perhaps he would understand. Her hand shook as she penned the final lines. Tears, hot and silent, stained the delicate paper, blurring some of the ink. But through the tears, there was also a surprising sense of peace, a quiet resignation. Her story, her truth, would finally be told. Her love, however unacknowledged in life, would be known. It might be too late for a different outcome, too late for shared futures, but it was not too late for him to know he had been deeply, truly loved. As she sealed the envelope, a faint smile touched her lips. She had given him the only part of herself she had left to give, her words. Section 9. The last page. A Love Eternal, Discovery and Remembrance. Layla passed away on a quiet Thursday morning, just as the city was beginning to stir. The rain was exceptionally gentle that day, a soft, respectful mist that blanketed everything in a pearly light. It was as if the heavens themselves were mourning the departure of a quiet soul who had loved their tears. The book nook remained closed, its windows dark, the cheerful bell above the door silent for the first time in years. A small, handwritten sign simply stated it was closed until further notice. Her absence left a void, a quiet echo in the places she had inhabited. Weeks turned into a month. Adam, immersed in the whirlwind of his approaching wedding, felt a strange, persistent pull, an inexplicable need to visit the quiet bookstore. He hadn't been in a while. He found it shuttered, the sign faded by the weather. A cold dread clenched his heart. He made inquiries at the shop next door and learned of Layla's passing. The news struck him with an unexpected force, a deep, hollow ache. He remembered her quiet smiles, her gentle recommendations, the peace he had always found in her presence. He couldn't explain why, but he felt compelled to find the book of poems she had once recommended, the one he had often seen her reading, the one he'd borrowed and returned. He tracked down the new owner of the bookstore's remaining stock and managed to purchase that specific, worn volume. Later that evening, alone in his study, he opened it. Tucked between the familiar pages, he found a thick, sealed envelope addressed to him in her delicate handwriting. His fingers trembled as he broke the seal. The world outside seemed to fall away as he began to read. The words on the pages hit him with the force of a physical blow. Her love, so deep and pure, confessed with such tender honesty. Her illness, her silent suffering, her reasons for not telling him. It was all there. He read of her joy, her pain, her quiet sacrifice. Tears streamed down his face, hot and unrestrained. He wept for Layla, for the beautiful, gentle soul he had known yet not truly seen. He wept for the love he had been oblivious to, a love that asked for nothing in return. He wept for the quiet girl who loved the rain, whose final words had finally reached him. Her letter was a testament. Their story, though seemingly unfinished, was now etched in his heart, eternal and poignant.